I think that the early experience of a poet is what really sets the tone for what happens later, and that the various philanthropic type things like Voices or like diarives or the various conferences that have happened are really kind of after the effect. The real thing that happens is early in life. If a person has a verbal aptitude, and then they're encouraged to do it. I was one of the first poets in the Poets in the School program. I didn't start it.
Okay.
I just joined up. It was actually a national movement, and nearly every state participated in it. Ours was called the Artists in Schools program, so we actually, in Michigan, and the Council of the Arts included other kinds of arts as well. But I think that the thing, again, that was reinforced for me was working with elementary school students primarily for a week at a time, was the earlier the better. The arts are really important because they stimulate the brain to create a readiness for other things. We all know about the connection now between mathematics and music. A child who is exposed to music early has a better mathematical orientation and aptitude as well. And poetry, of all the arts, poetry is the most stimulating of the basic brain functions that we need to stimulate in children early on. And it's cheap. It's free. I mean, you don't need musical instruments. You don't need a band room. You don't need art supplies and paper and a whole art room. It's the most effective of all the arts for stimulating a child to think more divergently. Because that's what poetry does to people. It stimulates the heart, the brain. And so it has such an enormous adjunctive and preparatory value for education, early education, not just for poetry itself, but for what the brain can then do when it's been exercised and stimulated to think in odd ways, in ways that are more creative. We need creativity in this country and adaptability, and that means mental flexibility. Well, my mother used to pull us on the couch and read poetry to us when I was just a little kid. When I was preschool, my mother taught me how to read. So I read at 5th grade level in the 1st grade. I had to go down to the 5th grade room for 5 years in my elementary school. So I think I had a verbal aptitude to begin with, but it was stimulated by my mother. And my mother and my grandmother were both poets themselves. My grandmother was a better poet than my mother was, but they had that value. It was part of their lives. And my grandfather, my mother's father, was a very quiet, sort of, the strong, silent type. But when he wanted to express himself, he would stand up at the head of the table after dinner, and he would give off a reading of If by Rudyard Kipling or Invictus by William Henley, and it'd be just amazing to hear my grandfather's voice just booming out those words of wisdom. And it had an actual value in their lives for that generation. They didn't have TV, but they were probably a little more in tune to what poetry can actually do for people. Invictus was really, I am the captain of my soul. I mean, just, to hear your grandpa, who never spoke much, suddenly declaring this feeling, this strong feeling, independence, and just a beautiful thing. And the other one was If by Rudyard Kipling. Very romantic and no metaphor really, but poetry doesn't have to have metaphor. You might prefer it with metaphor or symbol or whatever, but layers of meaning. But it can just be intense use of language of any sort. There's so many different ways to write poetry. And so then that means there's so many different ways to experience life and to think and to feel. It's really basically a stimulant. Yeah, so I was running around the house one day when I was 10 years old, and my mother was kind of frustrated because I was running all over and it was a rainy day out. And she said, "Why don't you go write me a poem?" Well, I did. And that was the first one. And so I already had that orientation. I started writing poems then, and I printed my first little book. I made 4 copies, one for my grandmom, one for my mother, one for my sister, and one for this old man down the street that taught me how to play guitar. And just kind of was already in that state when I went to school. And we had a defunct newspaper when I was in the 9th grade, and I got the idea of getting it going again. Nobody had been interested in it for years, so we started it up again, and it became really a literary magazine because I'd make the rounds to all the English teachers and get all the stories and poems that kids had written on assignment or even on their own. And so the newspaper, the high school was probably about 3/4 literary magazine, and the rest was sports news and gossip and stuff like that. It's a small, very contained little district, very blue collar. Almost all the men, all the fathers were factory workers. They worked at GM or they worked at Kelvinator. Those, well, I don't know if they're still around. The GM one was on 36th Street there, but both Godwin and Kellogg'sville were very working class. It was kind of a semi-rural little area, homeacres at the time. It was named that because all the lots were an acre. So, yeah, it wasn't much competition. I won the contest for 4 years in a row. So I was the only one that was really serious about it, really liked it that much. But by the time I got to junior college, there were kids from the other colleges as well. And you had a group of maybe 20, 25 people that were real interested in, took creative writing and wrote for the display, the Lit Mag. And then you met the kids from Calvin and Aquinas and Grand Valley. And pretty soon you had a collective that was quite a lot of activity for a while there. I feel that poetry is more effective on the page because it's a reflective experience for the reader that way. The reader can reflect over it, can take their time, can reread lines, can really see more levels than it goes speeding by them, verbally. I think that on the stage, it becomes much more of an entertainment item. A lot of those poems, when they're put on the page, do not succeed on the page. I think if it succeeds on the page, it should be able to succeed verbally as well. But I've known some major poets that were terrible readers too. And their poems really did not lend themselves well to being read out loud. I'll do the best I can with this one. This is Flood Tide. Another day surges over the horizon, flotsam sloshing through its dark sluice. Loose pages drift in pools like travelers asleep beneath the hills. There is no bowl to contain our tears, just flooded floors and a hastily abandoned factory. Though pleasure pours like rain, we swim on until dark, emerging from the water's edge, smelling like wet sand. Submerged beneath our common respiration, we wonder if the ocean breeze will keep us on course or blow us back into ourselves. We have thrown down our breathless waves, arriving home late, but still somehow hopelessly adrift. There is no pail for love. Even though we've wrapped ourselves within each other's arms, each of us still drowns alone. There is no pail for love. I think it's really quite literal. We need love. We try to save it. We can't. It passes through us like water. It is the stuff of life like water. But ultimately, we are alone. It's an existential statement, basically. I think and I think it's true. We have to die alone. And we also need to experience love for ourselves. So that's the way I see that one. I was probably 10 or 11. And these two boys, when you had buddies, if there were two brothers that were close in age, you got a bonus because you got two guys to play with at the same time. And we used to have this stupid thing of shooting at each other with BB guns. We all had these little single shot daisy guns that we'd take to the woods, and we'd have big wars running all over and shooting at each other. It's very stupid, but boys in the 50s, right? And one time I had my little gun with me, and I was heading over to play with Dave and Russ. And as I'm going down the street, down Montebello, I see there's an ambulance parked outside their house. And as I get closer and closer, people are crowding around. They lead Dave out, and he's crying. They lead him into a police car, and off he goes. And it turned out they were playing with their father's gun. And Dave had his father's shotgun, and they didn't know it was loaded. Russ came out around the corner, and Dave turned around and blasted him in half. Threw him right in the middle. And so they took him away to a home for emotionally impaired children, and I think it was Colorado, out west. And he was gone for another year or so, and he came back in junior high. And this was a kid who was really a happy kid. He was funny. It was fun to be around. He joked all the time, always grinning, laughing, just a fun kid to hang out with. But he was different when he came back. He wasn't the same at all. He was brittle. And he'd been traumatized, of course, So that's where that one came from. I fought doing autobiographical narrative type poetry for the longest time. I tried to do everything but, pretty much, because that was the dominant form that people were using, and I didn't want to be like everybody else. But I finally thought, I can really increase my circulation if I would. and I hadn't tried it yet, and I had a commitment in my own mind that I would try everything, and I write in different modes. So I started that mode, and that just was one of the memories that was significant, that was right there. I don't think I've ever forgotten about it. So wasn't really repressed. It was just not in a poem yet. My wife died 2 years and a couple of months ago. And I was very moved by a moment in that whole process just before she died. And I know there's a poem in there somewhere. First of all, when she died, I couldn't write poetry for nearly 2 years because she was my muse. But then the poems started to arrive subconsciously and then consciously, and I knew what the title would be. I know what the title will be. It's going to be called, if I ever get to write it, Her Final Smile. Because the moment that she consented to be taken off the ventilator, in essence, had committed to her own death, she smiled. I'm not there yet. I haven't written it yet. It's writing itself somewhere inside me. And I've written a few lines and then thrown them away, written a few more lines, sat on them for a couple of months, threw it away. I know the title. I know what it's got to be about. But it has to come out of its own good time. I don't believe in writing by assignment, and I don't believe by writing by idea. I think you have to write by feeling and almost instinctively. And I just feel like intuition is your greatest friend as a poet, and you wait for the poems. They come out when they want to come out, and you shouldn't try to force them. In fact, I try to keep them in. I'll try to keep them in, and they'll come out more complete that way. And all the best things I've ever written came out without needing very much rewriting at all. If I had to work on something, it probably didn't come out that well. I think that it's a conduit or a tool to open the mind and the heart. That's the therapy, the opening. But the tool's important. It's one way to get there. The nice thing about poetry as an art is that it incorporates the values, the positive values of all the other arts. It has musical value. It has graphic value. But it has emotional value. It has intellectual value. It has the most creativity of any, because of the unique aspect of being, the medium being words being concepts and ideas and symbols. You can't avoid symbolism in poetry. It's intrinsic in it. And then I think that you can't avoid symbolism. You can't avoid getting in touch with what's common between us. What do we hold in common? I think that's the essence of the whole thing, is universality. And how do we get in touch with that part inside us that is we have in common with all of us? It would be so valuable to bring it back into the schools in a big way. And any English teacher can do it. All they've got to do, very simple, was what I did when I taught at City High School in the formative year of City High School, first 2 years. Bring me back, here's your assignment. Bring me back a poem you like. If you can, you'll get a B. You have to tell me why you like it, and you have to really like it. Otherwise, anything will do. Find me a poem, bring it in, and tell me why you like it. You get a B. I want an A, and you don't like any, and so you have to write one for yourself, but you get an A. And it doesn't matter what the content is. All you have to do is like it. If you like it, you get an A. Bring me a poem you wrote. And here's a hint. Invent poetry. Don't write with reference to what you think it should be. Invent it as if you're the first one that ever wrote it. There it is, whole curriculum. Stick to those values. Any English teacher can do it. Boom. And the kids are enjoying it as an art, participating in it as an art, but it's also helping them to think and to feel and to widen themselves and open themselves up. Because that's what it's all about. It's all about becoming more open and more divergent and flexible in their thinking. It stimulates all kinds of other creativities. It's just one of those special little things that has that power because of words. It's satisfying. I don't focus on myself as a poet. I think I focus more on the poems themselves, and I feel like I'm happy for the poems. If the poems did well, I would like to see the poem. The poems are like children. Once you give birth to them, they're out on their own. You couldn't take them back if you wanted to. They're out there and they have a life of their own. So you want to see them do well, and so I guess that's how I don't think of it as me so much. Usually I get a first draft. If it's a good one, I get a first draft that's almost a completed draft. But it'll have little nuances that I want to change around maybe, or I want to add a better word or something. So I let them sit for a while. I don't do as much as my early mentor, Donald Hall, used to argue with me about this. This was our main dialogue. I'd drive over to Ann Arbor when he was teaching at U of M, and he and I would argue about revision, because he was totally against the spontaneity of the beats. And I thought there was something to be said for spontaneity, automatic writing, all of that. And he believed in constant revision, and he would revise poems 100 times sometimes. He'd revise a poem every day for 100 days. Then he'd keep it for a year. And, he was really anal that way. And so we'd argued about it. But he did get through to me to some degree, to where I learned to sit on them before I would send them off, sit on them before I would declare them to be really finished, let them just I'd get to a point where I thought, oh, this is finished. And then I'd let it sit on my counter for a couple of months before I'd look at it again, see if it really was finished. Well, as I said, I have to wait for it to force itself out. And then I feel really quite pleased and inspired. And I feel a little bit detached from the whole process, like standing back and kind of appreciating that it's happening. Amazed again, but it happens. But I never try to force it to happen. And as a result, I'm not real prolific anymore. When you first start out, you're exploring all these different things you could say and how you could say them, and then you've said them, so you don't want to say them again. I don't want to say anything again, and so once is enough for most things, and so it happens less frequently, but it still has the same shine. It still has the same great feeling. The things that I find are really significant are the creative writing classes. I think that's what really does something for kids and for young poets. Learn some different approaches, get some assignments, have to step outside your box a little bit. So I think that the teachers should get the credit. We had a great creative writing teacher. We had the creative writing department at junior college back then was for fiction was Walter Lockwood, and for poetry was Lucy DeLoof. And Lucy DeLoof was really an excellent teacher. She would give you assignments that brought out new things. She would tell us what the current standards were, which for me was fun because that meant that I was going to go against them. Every time she said, you can't do this in a poem nowadays, I would, of course, feel that this is exactly what I was going to do. You have to test, right? So that's where I think, you come together for a while, and I think it's socially meaningful to get together with your peers. But I think that ultimately it's a solitary act. It's something you do by yourself. And so it was fun for a while, and there were a lot of readings, and you got to know the personalities, and there was some real fun in that, at that age. But then I pulled away from it, and my whole focus started becoming outside Michigan, further and further out, further and further out. Never looked back. It was interesting because I sold 500 of them off the counter at junior college bookstore. What the hell's going on? All my fellow students are buying my little chapbook. It wasn't very good, but it was by one of them, and they bought it. $1 a copy. I was really surprised. I sold that many of them. Well, then I published a couple more. And I kept writing them, and I did 3 chapbooks. Then I did my first book, Sand, and they kept selling. And then I started getting a reputation in New York City, and we had standing orders for our books from all the bookstores in New York City, the Gotham Book Mart, the 8th Street Bookstore, all the big bookstores that had poetry. And the Grolier in Cambridge, and all of the big Eastern bookstores had standing orders. We would sell out a whole edition. We knew we would sell it out because we had standing orders for the whole edition. We just mail them out and get our checks back. And then the big collections like the University of Buffalo, the Brown University, University of Wisconsin, University of Texas, they all have large literary collections and small press collections. My mother was my first muse. I would write to please my mother. And then we kind of went from there. My first wife, my second wife. Then I finally realized in the last couple of months, actually, when I started writing poetry again, that I didn't write for her, that I wrote for the world. She was just my first reader. But she knew my poems as well as I did. She knew every punctuation mark. I mean, she literally did all my typing. She did all my submitting, everything. So I don't even have computer skills. I don't type. I write on a long sheet and I hand it to somebody and they type it and process it from there. Yeah, I just realized that in the last few months. It's what's gotten me back to being able to write poetry again, because it shut me right down. Her death shut me right down. It seemed, I've had several friends that are, I'm 74, and several of my friends have lost their spouses recently, and several of them were poets, and several of them started writing about it right away. I couldn't do it. I kind of felt, in a way, it was in bad taste. I mean, I just felt like it was such a personal experience that I wasn't really ready to just throw it into something public, I guess. That's why. I know I'll be writing a poem about her final smile, though, because it was so moving to me, the courage and the to get to that mental point where you can consent and you're that at peace. Yeah. That's quite an accomplishment. The second president, Aaron Lovers, and I are still good friends. He's 90 years old now. He's a wonderful man, and he's done an awful lot for this area. Well, he was a poetry lover. And the first time I did a little book, my little sand book, and I gave a copy to him, and he called me into his office, and he was busy. I mean, he was building Grand Valley. He was extremely busy. Oh, no, don't hold all my calls. Eric, come on in here. We went over every single poem in the book, and that became a routine. And we still write letters, and he reads all my books and tells me I'm his favorite poet. Shelley and Milton and Greinke, he said. So that was really great. I have a lot of feeling for him. Well, I judged the contest one year. I was in the contest one year, and John Hunting asked my partner Ronnie Lane, could you guys produce a magazine with all the student works, all the contest winners in it? So Ronnie said, can you do it? And I said, sure, I can do it. So I did it. And I thought of a title for it, and apparently it's still the title. I had already started the literary magazine out of Grand Valley. So I was kind of, and another one before that. So I was kind of the starter of a lot of them. I could come up with a title and a concept, and so I did, and I had to have a design for it. So I had an old astronomy book, and I thought, well, the implication of vastness and all that. I illustrated the first voices with illustrations from the astronomy book. Pictures of the moon in eclipse, picture of, the Saturn, stuff like that's what's in it. It's all pictures from that astronomy book. And then the cover, I didn't know what to do for the cover, so I slapped some Japanese writing on the front that I didn't even know what it meant. So that's how that one came about. Yeah, and that's the other thing. Don Hall used to just bug me. Go to New York. You need to go to New York. You can't stay here. You got to go to New York. I'm not going anywhere. That's not my take on it. My take on it is you speak out of your thrownness. It's an existential thing. This is where I was thrown. This is where I am. This is where I need to perceive life and live. And I'm a Michigan boy through and through. I love the woods. I love the lakes. I don't want to live anywhere else. I was out of here during Coast Guard boot camp and stuff. I saw what the rest of the country looks like. You fly into Michigan, you fly into the tree line. It's like, no, I know where I want to be. And I think that's one of the unique fun things about that art is that you can do it from your remote location. You don't have to be part of the social part. I think it actually works against the individual voice, your own, to have your own personal take on things. You need a little bit of solitude. not to be influenced too much by others or to take it too much as I am a poet. Kiss me, I'm poetic. You know, that whole deal. The social part of it doesn't appeal to me much. You know, the schools were the ones that really got things going. So you'd have a reading at Grand Valley, or you'd have a reading at Calvin, or at Fountain Street Church. And then Grand Valley brought in the very first National Poetry Festival. I had a fellowship to that, gave a reading at that, but participated in the workshops with Robert Bly and Ted Berrigan and all the many of the great avant-garde poets and black poets from the United States were there for that festival. It was really a good group. And then the second year, I got invited to read. And so I'm reading. There's Allen Ginsberg in the audience. I read to Allen. Couldn't help myself. And those events, Grand Valley especially, brought in a lot of readers. So you constantly had people coming in that were of national reputation, and all the beat poets, and they didn't shy away from the avant-garde either. And that was the good thing about it. It wasn't just a bunch of academic poets. It was the avant-garde poets. You know, your Black Mountain, your Beats, you know, your New York School. So you got a real view of what was really going on and all the possibilities. Well, I think the first poet that I was really aware of was Carl Sandburg. And he was interesting, too, because he wrote in a very clean, very, very sparse sort of Midwestern way, but he was also into folk music. And so that folk music aspect of it came into play. And then became intrigued with Shelley. I used to had this great big modern library book of Keats and Shelley, and, you know, a big 350-page book, and I'd walk around with that thing and trying like hell to understand Shelley, knowing that I liked the sound of it, the music part of it, not quite understanding what the hell he was talking about, but trying real hard to figure it out. So reading Shelley, and then from there, I think I was really, really impressed by Dylan Thomas, and the Cadman recordings of Dylan Thomas and Robert Frost reading were really influential. Both of them were extremely good readers, and Robert Frost became a real important poet for me. And then when you get, I took all of the English classes I could possibly take. I used all my electives to take more English classes. So I ended up taking all of the English classes that were offered at Grand Valley, every single one of them. I was the only one that did that. I had like a triple major in English at Grand Valley. And so you learn about all of, Eliot and Eliot, pretty important, pretty interesting. Ezra Pound, pretty interesting. And, some of the ones that you got in school, but the ones that were really I felt the most were Dylan Thomas and Robert Frost, I think, for the longest time. Then the modern, my mentors kind of got into me a little bit, Robert Bly and some of what he did, but I like his ideas more than his poems, but I like the ideas. And I had an ongoing correspondence with him after those workshops. And Ted Berrigan of the New York School was extremely creative. And so he was a huge influence on me. Just all the different ways he would approach a poem, the cut up, his sonnets, still a very important and one favorite poet for me is Ted Berrigan. And Frank O'Hara. Really, really loved the Frank O'Hara's voice and his the personal quality of his writing, and just the offhand sort of sound of it, and the way he thinks. Who else? Oh, I think I've hit most of them. My favorites there. Of the poetry books? Well, I think this last one here, Breakout, because it was doing some of the things that I really wanted to do. It has a lot of docu-poems in it. So I'm trying to evoke sympathy and empathy in my readers by reporting on some of the things like road rage and different social problems. But also, I was able to do some of the gazelle-like couplet-based poems that I have done over time. I've done a series of them, and they're very musical, and they rely on leaping, associative leaping, in a way that that your more linear type poems don't. This is a collaborative poem that I wrote with Allison Stone, who is a New York City poet, young enough to be my daughter, just. Emergency. A siren blares down the highway, hysterically red as raw meat. I imagine the worst disasters, twisted bodies and crumpled cars, stray bullets near a playground, families trapped and screaming or their houses on fire. Next, I think of real people. Then I hope it isn't them. Sure, every victim is somebody's something, but horror happening to strangers is bearable. Not even as real as small annoyances like running out of potato chips during your annual Super Bowl party. Maybe that's what it means to be human, stuck in personal hungers, ignoring or pretending to care about everyone else. One nation under fear with justice for none. Though we go through the motions skillfully, and even the siren's volume is less than the scream of greed. We wish for the silent strength to somehow be more than our natures, to match the siren's wail with our authentic grief, to stand alive and open in the red-tinged light. I escaped Grand Rapids back in the 70s, basically. Then we had this event 10 years ago where David Cope hauled me back out of my lakeside fortress and into Grand Rapids. And we did some readings and stuff, but no, I think their function is an important one, but it's after the fact. The scene's already existing, and then they enhance it. They can't create a scene, really. There's nothing you could do but the teachers can. The teachers can do a lot. And I think that's the biggest point that I would want to make today is that early education, use of the arts in the schools is so important, and poetry is such a cheap one. It's such a highly cost-effective. It should be taught in every English class during elementary school especially. Give them a joy of it, but give them the chance to learn to think, express themselves in a way that everybody... I think arts are natural to primates. People say to me, I can't draw. Yes, you can. You just don't like your own drawing. You can draw. You have a hand, don't you? I'll give you a pencil and you can draw. You may not like it, but that's a problem. That's an emotional problem. You can draw. Everybody can drum too. You don't even have to be a great genius on a musical instrument to play music. Yeah, I do think it's a conduit to greater things. I do think it has tremendous value, and it always makes me wonder when people think that it doesn't. What's it for? But it seems useless to a lot of people, and yet they haven't really applied themselves to thinking what can it really do? It can do a lot. That's where I'm at. I see it as a part of human potential.